Hey guys, tonight we explore one of the strangest, softest mysteries of ancient China, one that's been stepped on, avoided, whispered about behind silk fans, and somehow never made it into your school history books. Why did Chinese emperors never wear left shoes? You stand at the edge of the Forbidden City, its crimson walls glowing under a sleepy haze-filled twilight. The marble underfoot hums faintly from the day's heat. A pair of guards shuffle past in the stiff embroidered uniforms. You notice something odd. Every footprint in the dust is right heavy. You crouch. The left prints seem fainter, sometimes missing altogether. And then it hits you someone's not wearing both shoes. You're about to laugh thinking it's just bad arch support or a tired tailor. But as you follow the thread through dynasties, temples, burial chambers and scrolls, thicker than your thigh, things start to look weirder. Because for emperors, symbols of heaven on earth, balance wasn't always what you think. And maybe left shoes weren't just untrendy. Maybe they were cursed. You probably won't survive this wardrobe mystery, especially if you're left-footed. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge deeper into the inner courtyards of the Forbidden City, the heart of the Ming and Qing dynasties. And everything smells like sandalwood and slow-burning oil lamps. The tiled roofs above you glitter in moonlight, imperial dragons curling across every ridge. But your eyes keep drifting downward, because tonight it's the feet we follow. Specifically those of emperors and their mysteriously missing left shoes. On formal inspection days, the emperor would glide forward on polished stone, attended by an entourage that moved with choreographed precision. Every garment was regulated down to the last thread. And yet, according to certain records, rare and strange as they are, some observers noted a startling asymmetry in imperial footwear. Silk slippers often embroidered with gold thread and phoenix feathers adorned the right foot. The left sometimes covered, sometimes bare. Sometimes bound in a simple cloth, nothing more than ceremonial token. You picture the world's most powerful man hobbling slightly on his right side as he crosses the Hall of Supreme Harmony, surrounded by bowing officials pretending not to notice. This isn't fashion faux pas, it's ritual, baby. Historians still argue whether this one-shoe practice was widespread or merely symbolic, a metaphor embodied on certain days or only during specific rites. But if it was metaphor, it was one worn literally, and it gets stranger the deeper you go. As you follow the echo of footsteps through the palace, you pass behind the screen of the Hall of Mental Cultivation, where later emperors lived, ruled, and occasionally cried into their jade pillows. Here in the imperial quarters, you spot a curious display, a set of slippers arranged on a lacquered platform. One is grand and formal, the other far more modest. The label is cryptic, but the symbolism is loud. The right foot represented celestial order, the active force. The left was the yin, the void, the passive, even the dangerous. And that's your first clue. In Chinese cosmology, direction matters. Left isn't just a side of the body, it's a placement in the world. North, south, east, west, and center weren't just geography. They were power, personality, spiritual orientation. The right side was traditionally associated with the male principle yang, with action, sunlight, heaven. The left side, yin, female, shadow, earth. And though harmony came from balance, emperors weren't interested in balance. They were interested in dominance. So you see now, to wear only the right shoe wasn't a mistake. It was a message. You wander farther, tiptoeing through memory, and overhear one sleepy eunuch whispering to another in a dream fragment from centuries ago. The left shoe calls ghosts. The right one keeps them at bay. You're not sure if they're joking. You're also not sure if you want to test it. It wasn't just emperors. High-ranking officials, particularly during certain rites, ritual banquets, ancestor offerings, even war planning, were sometimes seen adjusting a single slipper, revealing calloused feet or delicately henna-stained toes. You imagine a room full of ministers trying not to wobble on the polished floors, everyone looking terribly serious, half-shod, in obedience to something older than any of them. And here's a kicker in some scrolls from the Ming Dynasty. You find curious advice passed down from court tailors: ensure symmetry in sleeves, leave asymmetry in steps. The tailors didn't just make robes, they shaped the imperial silhouette, and somewhere in that silhouette, missing a left shoe meant more than wearing two. Of course, this didn't go unnoticed by foreign diplomats. One Jesuit priest visiting the Qing court wrote in his letters of His Imperial Majesty, advancing with the grace of a swan, though I confess there appeared a curious lilt to his gait, as if he avoided full footing on his left side. The priest chalked it up to infirmity. You smile. Poor guy had no idea he was witnessing cosmic symbolism in action. And yet, not everyone agreed on this practice. Some records from the same periods show emperors in full regalia symmetrical to the toe. Historians still argue whether this discrepancy means some emperors rejected the asymmetry or whether certain scribes just edited out what felt too weird. It's hard to say what's real and what's just smudged ink, but the rumours persisted. Even peasant storytellers along the Yellow River would whisper tales to scare their kids. If you see a man walking with only one shoe after dark, do not follow him. He may be emperor or something worse. That one probably got more dramatic over time, but still, what a bedtime story. And then there's the practical angle. Shoes were sacred objects in ancient China. They weren't just tools, they were talismans. You might laugh at that today, but think about it. Shoes carry you into danger, into temples, into war, into marriage. And for emperors, every step was layered with meaning. The choice to step unevenly may have been about reminding everyone, including the emperor himself, that he straddled two realms, mortal and divine, earth and heaven, stability and risk. You pause to rest in a shadowy side courtyard, where stone lions sleep under ivy-draped balconies. Your mind drifts. Imagine being the shoemaker who crafts imperial slippers, knowing only one will ever be worn publicly. That's pressure. That's art. That's also a marketing nightmare. Why buy a pair when the right one's divine? And here's the weirdest part. During one Qing Dynasty festival, according to a single obscure diary entry, the emperor reportedly flung his left shoe into a sacred lake to appease river spirits. Whether it worked or not, the rains came early that year. As you curl into your blanket, the sound of soft footsteps still echoes behind your ears. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. Right foot, then hesitation. A rhythm of empire, of power, of deliberate imbalance. And the deeper you look, the more it feels like the left shoe didn't disappear. It was banished. You wander farther into the gardens, past sleeping lotus ponds and whispering willows. The moon hangs heavy now, thick and golden, like a lantern soaked in dreams. You duck beneath a carved arch, its dragon faces curled into silent snarls, and step onto a path padded with moss and forgotten footsteps. You're not sure how long you've been walking, but something draws you deeper, a pull toward the first stories, the beginning of this one-shoed strangeness. Before there were emperors in gilded robes and marble palaces, there were myths. Ancient mossy legends passed down in songs, charcoal sketches on cave walls, and whispered warnings around cook fires. And in these stories, the feet, especially the left foot, often played a mysterious, sometimes creepy role. One old tale, barely remembered even in sleepy scrolls, tells of a divine stag who stomped the earth into order with his right hoof, but whose left behind chaos. Everywhere his left foot fell, rivers bent the wrong way, trees grew upside down, and fish forgot how to swim. People feared the places marked by the stag's left print, calling them cursed zones. You probably wouldn't build your house there even today. Another legend centers on Nuwa, the goddess who patched the sky after a cataclysmic disaster. She created humans from yellow clay, carefully sculpting their forms with her divine fingers. But some versions say the first batch of humans stood unevenly, left legs weaker than right. The gods argued over how to fix them, and one, perhaps jealous or mischievous, whispered a curse into the clay. Let the left foot always remind them of the chaos from which they came. You're starting to get the idea. In early Chinese cosmology, feet weren't just for walking. They symbolized movement, yes, but also direction, intention, balance, and imbalance. The left foot in particular seemed to carry echoes of danger, unpredictability, even shame. Some Han-era carvings show demon chasers, warrior priests meant to protect villages from evil spirits, wearing thick-soled shoes on their right foot and delicate sandals on their left. Was it for agility, maybe? But more likely, it was symbolic. One foot in the realm of men, one scholar suggests, and one barely touching the realm of ghosts. A lovely idea, but historians still argue whether that image represented reality or metaphor. And then there's the idea of stepping across thresholds. In many traditional households, it was considered bad luck to enter a new home or temple with your left foot first. That's right. You could be perfectly dressed, hair-combed, lantern in hand. But if you stepped left first through the gate, Auntie was definitely going to blame you for every broken teacup and unhappy rooster for the next year. Imagine applying that standard to an emperor. If the left foot led to bad fortune, it only makes sense the emperor might limit how often he used it, at least symbolically. He wouldn't want to enter a new season, a new war, a new blessing ceremony with the unlucky foot first. So maybe he simply stopped leading with it, or wearing it. You glide into a grove of bamboo, the sound of wind slipping between the stalks like silk through fingers. You imagine a young noble just learning court protocol, asked to walk properly in front of his teacher. No, no, the old man hisses, tapping a long fan against the boy's knee. The left is shadow, the right is rule. And suddenly, you're not surprised when later tales mention secret foot taboos among royal circles. One Tang Dynasty journal written in hurried brushstrokes mentions that certain gate rituals required the emperor to pivot on his right foot before entering ancestral shrines. Another text from the Song period says officials had to stand with their left feet behind them during proclamations as if ready to retreat from misstep. Even in poetry, the left foot gets a bad edit. One 8th century court poet wrote, "He steps forth with heaven's heel, his right foot true, the left concealed." Which, if you think about it, sounds like a fancy way of saying don't trust that lefty. But it wasn't all fear and curses. Some early spiritual practices, particularly Taoist rites, used the left foot in very specific ways. To summon, to descend, to enter other realms. A priest might initiate a trance by shifting weight to his left side, stepping into what they called the drifting gate. That's not the kind of thing an emperor symbol of grounded power and divine order would want to emulate. It would be like seeing your boss trying to levitate during a board meeting. There's even a fringe theory, half archaeology, half gossip, that an early Zhou dynasty king was born with a deformed left foot. Rather than allow such a flawed form to be seen, court propaganda spun it into a holy mystery. The king's limp became a symbol of celestial distinction. The missing left shoe a permanent reminder that he didn't walk like mortals. He glided with divine imbalance. Of course, the truth is hazier than your vision right now. Most early records were oral, passed from mouth to ear, to scroll to memory, to bedtime tales. And in that telephone game of dynasties, facts blur. What began as a limp might become a prophecy. What started as a superstition might evolve into a rule. And the farther back you go, the fuzzier it gets. In the Xia dynasty, the oldest semi-mythical dynasty of China, there are no surviving shoe records, but fragments of ceremonial foot-shaped jade have been found in tombs. One of these had an exaggerated arch on the right side, the left flat. Some scholars think it was an artistic quirk. Others whisper it meant more. Maybe this idea of foot imbalance has older, dustier roots than even we know. And yet even if you try to leave it behind, the left foot keeps popping up always in the background. In old ghost stories, the departed are said to drag their left foot. In wedding rites, brides are advised to stand steady on the right, lest misfortune follow. And in stage plays, when the villain enters, they often step left first on purpose. The audience gasps. They know. You pause beneath a pavilion, your own feet aching slightly from your journey, and imagine your shoes. Would you take the left off now, just to fit in with the emperors of old, just to be safe, just to be cosmically correct? You think about the left-footed dancer shunned from the palace troupe, about the general who limped on his left and was never promoted again, about the peasants who avoided selling single left shoes at market because who would want to walk into chaos alone? The stories come faster now, overlapping like wind chimes in a slow breeze. A child born with a left clubfoot was once considered marked by the underworld. A concubine who wore 2 left shoes was rumoured to be possessed. A bronze statue found buried outside Luoyang has only 1 sandal on its right. Coincidence maybe? Or maybe we just haven't been paying attention to the feet in our history books. And honestly, you kind of get it. After all, when every movement of the emperor carried divine significance, why wouldn't the most basic one, a single step, be loaded with layered meaning? You lie back now, your body like your toes tingling with the weight of myths. Maybe next time you stand up, you'll notice which foot you lead with. Maybe you'll hesitate, or maybe you'll walk barefoot for a bit, just to play it safe. You awaken slightly, or maybe you were never really asleep lying on a bench of carved stone that's warmer than it should be. Around you, the hush of twilight continues thick with the perfume of magnolia and old incense. Somewhere in the distance, a gong echoes low, slow, like a yawn in bronze. You rise, your joints popping just a bit, and wander deeper into the imperial sprawl. Tonight we go from myth to material, because it's one thing to talk about left shoes symbolically. It's another to look at actual physical relics. And weirdly enough, Chinese shoe history is kind of fabulous. Shoes have always been more than fashion here. Their status, ritual, rank, power, soft-souled poetry for your feet. And as you pass through the Emperor's Wardrobe Pavilion, you realize this is where things really get bizarre. You step through hanging silk veils, each one shimmering with phoenix thread. There are rows of garments, each lined like sleepy soldiers. Robes of cloud brocade. Headdresses bejeweled enough to give a migraine. And then, shelves. Dozens of them. Rows of slippers. Right foot, right foot, right foot. You freeze. Because you're looking at a whole rack of ceremonial footwear, many made for emperors across centuries. And while most sets appear complete, some aren't. Pairs where the left shoe looks oddly untouched, stiff, fake almost. Or worse, missing altogether. One display has a glass plaque with a note in both Mandarin and tiny English print: ceremonial slippers late Qing. Right foot worn during harvest offering. That's it. No mention of the left. You squint at the stitching, delicate, intricate golden cloudwork that curves inward always toward the arch. The wear is evident. Scuffs on the ball of the foot. A slight bend at the heel. The right shoe tells a story. The left doesn't speak at all. Historians still argue whether this practice was functional. Was the left shoe simply carried reserved for sudden emergencies? Or were these displays never meant to be walked in? Some experts say the missing lefts were intentional. Others believe they were lost over time or buried separately. It's a strange thing to debate, but they do. And the slipper trail leads you somewhere unexpected, a private collection from a 19th century Manchu noblewoman tucked behind the exhibit. She kept detailed notes on palace fashion. One entry reads, "His Majesty donned only one shoe for the right of the vermilion drum. The left remained bound in cloth, untouched by earth as is custom." No further explanation. As is custom. Like we're all just supposed to know. In another scroll, a royal shoemaker from the Ming dynasty describes crafting mirror shoes, 2 right shoes made to resemble a pair. One would be placed for display, the other hidden away sealed in a lacquer box with a prayer carved into the lining. the prayer to protect his step from shadows. Oh, and if you're thinking, but surely everyday emperors wore both shoes, right? Well, yes and no. Day-to-day practical movements required full footwear, but special ceremonies, birthdays, funerals, harvest prayers, the rare solar eclipse offering called for asymmetry. Even if no one talked about it openly, even if it only showed up in footnotes or in worn right soles that told stories left out of the records. You move to another room, darker now, lined with burial relics. Here lie the tomb slippers. In ancient China, emperors were buried with whole armies, treasures, favorite dishes in model form, and of course, shoes. Many burial slippers were symbolic, soft-soled, unwalkable, sometimes made of silk, so delicate they disintegrated when air touched them. But in a few notable tombs, only a right shoe remains. One from the Han dynasty was unearthed in 1968. The foot bones told one story, the slippers another. The right was worn, the left pristine. Scholars still debate whether this was coincidence tomb raider damage or intentional. You know where you're leaning. And what about shoe placement in tombs? Some were arranged east to west, others north to south. But occasionally, the left shoe, if it appeared at all, was placed sideways, or even upside down. Was this an act of defiance, confusion? A last-minute funeral intern making questionable choices? Or was it a silent ritual, a farewell to imbalance meant to escort the emperor into the afterlife, where no steps were misstepped? The fringe theories get even better. There's one tomb from the Tang dynasty where the left shoe was buried outside the inner coffin chamber, deliberately placed in a small clay alcove along with coins and a dead sparrow. Some say this was a sacrifice meant to carry the emperor's shadow step away from the spirit world. Others call it nonsense. But you know better than to call anything nonsense when ancient emperors are involved. As you move through more relics, you start noticing a pattern footwear, not just worn or displayed, but hidden. Right shoes shown. Left shoes tucked in drawers pressed between prayer scrolls or even burned after use. There's a Qing-era account of a priest doing just that. The left sandal of His Majesty, unfit to remain in this realm, was fed to the fire beneath the temple urn. Drama much. But hey, it wasn't just emperors playing footsie with fate. Some empresses and concubines followed similar customs. The beloved empress Xiaoxian wife of the Qianlong emperor was said to always remove her left shoe before entering the hall of heavenly purity. One maid wrote her steps made no sound when she walked barefoot on the left. The floor knew not her full tread. That's either poetic or haunting, or both. And even eunuchs, those ever-present palace assistants, were known to prepare uneven sets for ceremonial wear. In a back room of the Forbidden City, a faded sign still hangs. Prepare, right for sky, left for silence. A tailor's riddle, a warning, a habit so deeply ingrained it needed no further explanation. You sit again just for a moment back against cool tile. The stories press in gently like slippers of their own. They fit a little too well. And then you wonder, where are the lost left shoes? Scattered in museum archives, mismatched, mislabeled as unknown piece, hidden in imperial storage crates, or never made at all. Some theorists claim left shoes were never fabricated for certain occasions, that the right shoe was the only true artifact, the only symbol that mattered, that when an emperor took a step into sacred space, only his order foot touched the world. The left remained metaphor, implied, shadow-bound. It's absurd, it's fascinating, it's deeply, weirdly believable. Because if you're the son of heaven, and every twitch of your toe affects the tides and harvests and marriages of millions, wouldn't you be a little careful about what hits the ground? Especially if left is chaos, if left is shadow, if left is the thing you don't dare invite in too often. You leave the pavilion mind reeling slightly, body floating. Your own feet feel oddly self-aware now, like they're wondering which one you'll favour next. You glance down and half expect to see your left slipper fading like a dream. One shoe to rule, one shoe to hide. That's the legacy beneath the brocade. You drift onward through corridors that don't quite stay straight hallways that bend like whispers around corners. The palace seems to shift as you walk not in a spooky haunted house way, but more like a lazy dream that isn't too worried about floor plans. Your footsteps echo softly, cushioned by age and quiet. Right, left, right. But now you're listening closer to that left. This time you enter a space not made of gold and silk, but of ledgers and lists of quiet scrolls and dusty seals the Bureau of Rights. And no, it's not nearly as boring as it sounds, because this is where the rules of being emperor were written, painstakingly detailed, agonizingly edited and fiercely guarded by court officials whose job was to make sure celestial power didn't trip over its own hemline. And when you crack open one of their records, the rabbit hole goes deep fast. Inside these logs are instructions on how an emperor must dress for every single type of day, solar celebrations, moon festivals, ancestral rites, even rain. Not kidding. If thunder clapped, someone was dispatched to change His Majesty's sleeve length. But shoes are their own section. There's a record from the Tang dynasty that lists 127 separate footwear types used in court. And that's not even counting regional varieties or seasonal adjustments. You get leather winter boots with fur linings, hemp summer sandals dyed in orchid root, shoes that sparkled with pearl inlays for New Year's audiences. But, and this is where your sleepy eyebrows lift, the left shoe often came with optional ceremonial presents. Yeah, optional, sometimes marked with just 2 brushstrokes. KQ may be omitted. Not always. Not for battlefield attire or for imperial inspections. You wouldn't want to look lopsided while judging rice paddies. But for spiritual rituals, left shoes were considered dispensable. And the bureaucrats wrote it down like it was no big deal. One scroll, a Song Dynasty footnote in the Grand Book of Seasonal Attire, puts it bluntly. For the right of the southern wind, His Majesty shall wear the right slipper of sky brocade. The left may be symbolically wrapped, but not worn. You pause. That's a lot of attention for something not being worn. Another record from the Ming Dynasty details the preparations for an emperor's ascension ceremony. Under footwear requirements, it lists the materials and dimensions for the right shoe in loving detail. 7 stitches per inch phoenix toe curve, gold thread instep. The left shoe to be placed beneath the throne unseen, like it's too shy to come out or too dangerous. But don't get the wrong idea, this wasn't some slacker moment in the bureaucracy. These guys loved rules. Obsessively. They wrote footnotes for footnotes. If something was left blank or marked symbolic, it meant it was meant to be missing. Nothing in these documents happened by accident. And when the left shoe vanished from the page, it was always deliberate. Of course, modern scholars have tried to explain this with more grounded theories. One common idea: budget. Maybe only one shoe was fully decorated to save time and money. But that falls apart fast when you remember we're talking about emperors who once ordered entire bridges made of white jade just across a koi pond. Saving on slippers? Not likely. Another theory says it was for mobility. Perhaps the emperor needed to kneel and the left shoe's design interfered with the robe's flow. Possible. But then why not redesign the robe? Or the ritual? Why only drop the left? The fringe theorists get more creative. One claims the left shoe was cursed by a long-dead minister during the Warring States period who uttered his dying words into a sandal. Let your steps always falter when you wear me. Not exactly the stuff of peer-reviewed journals, but hey, you're in bedtime history land now. Let's allow a little drama. Then there's the yin-yang theory. According to some ritual manuals, the emperor's body was mapped like a cosmological diagram. Right side, yang, the active masculine divine force. Left side, yin, the passive earthly hidden energy. Wearing a left shoe during high ceremonies may have been seen as grounding the emperor too much, too human, too vulnerable. Going barefoot on the left side, that's staying in touch with spirit realms. Ethereal balance. Half in, half out. Historians still argue whether this interpretation holds water. Some say it's retrofitting Taoist ideas onto earlier Confucian practices. Others swear it was intentional, the footwear equivalent of a spiritual antenna. You lean against a scroll rack and imagine the scene, a dawn ceremony. The emperor stands beneath a blood-orange sky, holding a jade scepter, his right foot encased in gold-embroidered brocade, the left wrapped in silken gauze. He takes one step forward, the right foot kisses the earth. The left hovers slightly above the grass. His soul, they say, follows his body half a pace behind. Does it sound overly poetic, maybe? But in the Bureau of Rites, poetry was protocol. Another curious detail. Inspection stamps. Yes, there were inspectors whose job it was to check the emperor's outfit for correctness before he appeared publicly. One Ming Dynasty inspector, Chen Bo, wrote in his diary, "Right shoe snug, thread count correct, embroidery sharp, left shoe wrapped in cloth per spring ceremony ordinance, no fault found. His Majesty's step was true. Spirits will favour the rice." Now that's a performance review. And while this whole asymmetrical thing might sound strange now, remember, the imperial body was never just a body. It was the axis of the empire. Every hair combed, every hemline straight, every toe placed just so. The empire's luck depended on His Majesty's equilibrium, sometimes literally. During the Qing dynasty, one unlucky emperor reportedly stumbled during a temple offering. The right shoe held fast, the left, barely worn, slipped. The rice harvest failed that year. Coincidence? The Bureau didn't think so. That year they rewrote the shoe guidelines with even more specifics. The left foot must remain unshod for sacred rites. Period. And if you're wondering whether anyone ever rebelled, there's one cheeky record written in code, almost by a low-level robe inspector, where he notes that one emperor once insisted on wearing both shoes fully embroidered during a dragon boat festival. The result? A strong wind capsized the lead boat. The emperor's mood darkened. The next year, he returned to protocol. Lesson learned. You smile a little, tracing the edge of a parchment that still smells faintly of cedar. You're beginning to admire how seriously the court took these things. From the outside, skipping a left shoe sounds trivial. But inside the palace, it was a statement, a design choice, a cosmic alignment strategy. It wasn't about comfort or laziness. It was about walking correctly across realms between seasons into blessings. And you've been walking all night tracing these stories through stone and scroll barefoot in imagination, if not in practice. You wonder now what your own shoes say about you. Maybe nothing, maybe everything. Maybe just that you didn't expect to spend your evening obsessing over imperial shoe politics, but now you are. And the deeper you go, the more the silence between steps begins to speak. The path winds now through a softer space where the scent of old pine and plum blossoms drifts with the breeze, and the stones beneath your feet are rounded from centuries of shuffling sandals. You're in the imperial gardens, though gardens hardly do it justice. It's more like a world sculpted from patience and symmetry, where each rock was placed like punctuation, every ripple in the koi pond carefully considered. And yet here too, the mystery of the left shoe lingers. You settle near a red-lacquered bridge, where the moon reflects like spilled ink on the water. Here in the gardens, the emperor wasn't just a ruler. He was a figure in a cosmic tableau, a living symbol of order, and the harmony between man and nature. And that's where our next twist lies. You see, ceremonial gardens like this weren't just for strolling. They were for walking in particular ways, during particular times, with particular feet. And according to surviving records from the Yuan and Ming dynasties, the emperor's footwork through these sacred grounds wasn't just choreography, it was metaphysics. Let's break it down. There was something called the 9-step ritual path, a precise walking pattern used during offerings to the sky or important seasonal transitions. And guess how it started? Right foot forward, always. The steps themselves had names. Yes, names. Step 1, the rising sun. Step 2, the root of earth. Step 3, the dragon's pulse. And so on, until step 9, the turning of fate. But only odd steps used the right foot. Even steps were pauses, breaths, moments to shift weight, but never fully commit the left foot to the earth. One old manuscript reads, "To place the yin foot forward in sacred soil is to risk opening the gate of shadows. No thanks, gate of shadows, we're good." And while that sounds dramatic, remember, in a worldview where harmony between heaven, earth, and the body determines the empire's fate, even a toe out of place could be interpreted as inviting drought rebellion or a comet. And nobody wants to be that emperor. So walking wasn't just walking. It was a ceremonial act, like writing a poem with your body. And if that poem needed to leave out one syllable, well, sorry, left foot. Garden rituals weren't only male territory either. Empresses, concubines, even palace musicians participated in seasonal treadings, delicate walking ceremonies around lotus ponds, each step mimicking the bloom of a flower. And some of them wore what were called cloud shoes slippers, so soft they made no sound. One legend tells of a concubine so favoured by the Yongjung emperor that he had her cloud shoes stitched with phrases of poetry, but only on the right shoe. The left was left blank for mystery, he said. Or maybe just because he didn't want the poem to fall into the koi pond. There's also a rather sleepy detail from the Song dynasty where garden walkers were instructed to tap their right foot lightly before stepping onto the dew-covered path at dawn. The left foot would follow in silence. A literal shadow step. Some believe this was to symbolically honour ancestors who were thought to walk behind us in mist. Historians still argue whether these practices had consistent meaning or whether local traditions shaped them more than imperial decree. Were these barefoot pauses an empire-wide ritual, or just palace theatre designed to impress bored ministers? Some scholars believe garden rituals were performative mysticism, an elegant distraction. Others insist they were deadly serious, used to influence real political decisions based on the omens gathered during the walk. If His Majesty's heel caught on a stone, bad sign. If he reached step 9 without breaking rhythm, golden year ahead. And let's talk about the footwear made specifically for these rituals. Garden shoes, also known as dew slippers, were usually made of embroidered satin or ultra-thin leather. They absorbed water fast, which may explain the lack of a left slipper. In some ceremonies, one theory suggests only one foot got wet to symbolize touching the earth with caution. You know, in case the cosmos was in a mood. In the Imperial Workshop records, there's a pair of dew slippers made for the Qianlong Emperor decorated with tiny cranes and gold thread. Only the right shoe survives. The left not even mentioned in the registry. It's as if it never existed. Or maybe it wasn't supposed to. Then there are stories of foot binding gone ceremonial. No, not in the traditional horrifying sense, but in the idea of the emperor's left foot being symbolically bound. Wrapped not to deform, but to restrict movement, to say this part of me doesn't move in sacred space. An idea echoed in paintings, where emperors are often shown mid-step with the right foot, lifted the left planted firmly or slightly obscured. You move past a stone lantern and find an older corner of the garden less manicured, wild with overgrown peonies. A plaque nearby identifies it as the Hidden Walk. According to the sign, this was once used for private ceremonies, rituals not recorded in official texts. Rumour has it, emperors came here when they needed spiritual clarity, or when they'd had too much wine at the Mid-Autumn Feast. No one agrees on what happened during these walks. Some say the emperor removed both shoes to commune with nature directly. Others whisper that only the left shoe was removed, buried under the first stone step to anchor his spirit. A Taoist monk's journal from the 1600s offers a cryptic account. He walked in silence, one foot bare, one shod in sunlight. The birds did not flee. The dew did not cling. His mind, I believe, was cleared, whatever that means. But not all shoes left behind were symbolic. Some were accidental. A Qing-era tale tells of an emperor who lost his left shoe in a garden pond during a full moon ritual. He declared the event auspicious, renamed the pond Lake of Heavenly Misstep, and had a new poem engraved on a nearby rock. Even imbalance is grace, if the stars approve the stumble. Honestly, not a bad motto for life. And speaking of imbalance, Garden walks also mirrored the emperor's role as a bridge between opposites heaven and earth, sun and moon law and mercy. Wearing only the right shoe was never just fashion, it was alignment. A walking metaphor, one foot in order, the other in mystery. You look down at your own feet again, one perhaps colder than the other now, as if the stories are seeping into your souls. There's something meditative about it, isn't there? A walk where you choose not to engage fully, where you let one side rest while the other leads. You don't need both feet making noise. Sometimes the silence is the step. As the breeze picks up, petals fall across your path like faded confetti, the smell of old plum and pine thick in the air. You let yourself imagine the emperor walking here once, one foot padded in brocade, the other bare, a ghost's whisper with each pace. He might have been praying, or reflecting, or just trying not to trip over symbolism, but whatever he was doing, he wasn't walking evenly. And somehow, that's the point. The scent of pine fades as you pass through another lacquered archway, this one carved with dragons mid-flight and cloud tendrils curling like incense. You're now deep in the residential quarters of the Forbidden City, the so-called inner court, where emperors ate, rested, and tried not to die of boredom between ceremonies. It's quieter here, but the silence feels different, less reverent, more secretive. Like the palace itself is holding its breath. And here in these softer shadows, we return to the left shoe. Not in public ritual this time, but in private life. Because while historians love to write about emperors standing tall on marble platforms, or parading across sacred bridges in full regalia, they rarely mention what happened when the ceremonies ended. When the crowds dispersed, the gongs fell silent, and the emperor padded back to his quarters. And that's where things get even weirder. There's an old record from the Han Dynasty that describes the daily dressing habits of the emperor. It includes meals, morning routines, favoured calligraphy brushes, and what appears to be a footnote about unshod pauses. It reads, "Upon waking His Majesty shall rest his right foot into the brocade slipper, the left to remain cool until the midday bell." Wait, what? That's right. Some emperors, for reasons not entirely explained, would go half-shod until midday. Apparently, it was thought to promote circulation or preserve the left's passivity. That's about as medical as these guys got. The real reason, you guessed it, still debated. One theory argues that the left foot was believed to be more spiritually porous, more sensitive to the unseen world. Letting it breathe in the quiet morning was a form of gentle psychic tuning, kind of like sleepwalking with purpose. Another text from the Tang Dynasty describes a servant's role as presenting the second slipper after the emperor finished his morning tea. The right was put on immediately, the left handed over only if the emperor gave a certain nod. If not, the slipper was placed respectfully on a warm cushion nearby. Sometimes it sat there all day, and not just for one emperor. We have multiple reports across centuries where attendants describe the same morning routine: robe, hair comb, right shoe. Pause. Left foot bare or loosely wrapped. Some emperors preferred slippers lined with silk on the right and hemp on the left. "Why to feel both power and humility," wrote one Qing-era servant. Very humble. With a thread count of 1-200. Historians still argue whether these left-foot rituals were codified or just quirks of powerful men with too much time on their hands. Some say it was personal superstition. Left foot always felt unlucky, maybe. Others think it was part of broader Taoist ideas about letting the left rest, aligning with lunar cycles or chi flow. You imagine the scene: early morning. A grey light slips through the paper-panelled windows. The emperor stretches, yawns, waves away breakfast porridge. A servant kneels, lifting the golden brocade right slipper. His Majesty accepts, slides it on. The left remains untouched. For a few hours he wanders like this, one foot, shod one not through long hallways with stone floors, warmed by hidden stoves. It's not a walk of imbalance. It's just how he exists. Later, perhaps by mid-morning, he'll motion. The second slipper arrives. Only then is he complete. Another curiosity, the dream logs. Yes, actual logs. During the Tang Dynasty, emperors kept or had scribes keep dream logs documenting nightly visions. In one, an emperor claims he dreamed of ascending a staircase made of stars. But only his right foot touched each step. The left hovered bathed in silver mist. He took it as a sign. The next day he ordered a decree left shoes were to be softened with goose down and never tied too tightly. So the soul may depart freely, he said. A little dramatic, but it makes a strange kind of sleepy sense. And it's not just emperors. The eunuchs too had something to say about footwear. A diary from a senior palace attendant during the Ming Dynasty reports. His Majesty was restless today. Did not summon the second shoe until well past noon. Perhaps a bad dream, or indigestion. That same eunuch also notes how sometimes, especially during lunar eclipses, the emperor refused all footwear until sunset. Something about the yin forces being too high, the earth's pull too strong. You can't help but picture this powerful man, ruler of millions, hiding his left foot, like it's some kind of cosmic antenna picking up too much static. And maybe it was. Let's not forget the night slippers. Another pair kept near the bed, not for walking, but for dreams. These were crafted from feathers soft as air meant to be worn during meditative rest. But surprise, the left one often came unlaced or was never worn at all. Some believe it was to prevent the spirit from getting too comfortable in the body during sleep. That sounds like nonsense until you realize these people believed dreams could literally transport parts of the soul. A fully shod dreamer. Too grounded. A half-bare foot more receptive to otherworldly travel. There's a Qing text that takes it even further. It suggests a proper dream session should begin with right foot warmed in silk, left foot bared to the moonlight, head pointed north, heart steady. Now that's a bedtime routine, and if you're wondering, yes, there were fashion consequences. Tailors who made imperial footwear had to anticipate these asymmetries. One famous artisan, Liu of Suzhou, made right slippers slightly stiffer and more ornate, while left ones were softer, sometimes designed only for short wear or symbolic placement. He once said in a letter, "The right shoe carries the emperor's law. The left carries his mood." What a line. And sometimes moods shift. One emperor, unfortunately unnamed in the palace records, reportedly became obsessed with balance in his later years. He wore 2 identical left shoes for 3 days straight. Nobody dared correct him. The empire did not fall, but a mural was quietly adjusted to reflect a right shoe once again, balance restored. There's even evidence of a spiritual game called the slipper choice performed by palace mystics. The emperor would close his eyes and reach for one of 2 left slippers, each containing a secret message stitched inside. One might say, "Trust the south." The other, "Wait for rain." Decisions were made this way. Some believe entire wars began because of a slipper's whisper. Of course, modern scholars mostly roll their eyes at this. Folklore, they say. Court gossip. But still, it's in the logs. Repeated, revered, remembered. And maybe after so many centuries of kneeling, nodding, walking half-shod through ritual and rebellion, the left shoe wasn't forgotten. It was transcendent. You let that thought settle as you pass through the emperor's sleeping chamber. The light is soft here. Dust drifts like memories. Beside the great bed, 2 embroidered slippers rest. One is perfectly upright. The other is on its side as if it rolled there in a hurry. You don't need to guess which is which. The floor creaks beneath you, a long wooden groan that feels older than reason. You've crossed into a part of the palace that doesn't welcome noise. Low ceilings, narrow halls. The air is still like it hasn't moved in centuries. This is the archive quarter. Shelves to the ceiling drawers stacked with bamboo slips, silk scrolls, brittle ledgers bound with threads. You're not here for the loud moments of history. You're here for the scribbles in the margins, the overlooked, the footnoted, the almost forgotten. Because here, among court records and imperial receipts, lives a peculiar thread that keeps tugging back to the mystery of the left shoe. It starts small. A ledger from the early Tang dynasty detailing textile requests from the Ministry of Rites. It lists 24 right foot slippers, dragon embroidery, gold thread, 24 left foot slippers, plain brocade, silver thread, 6 right foot sandals, cedar sole ceremonial use, 0 left foot sandals marked not required in red brush. You'd think this was a clerical error, but it isn't. The same thing happens again in the next season's ledger. And the one after that. Not required. Let's say it together like a mantra. The emperor does not require a left sandal. Flip forward a few decades and you find a training manual for court scribes. Mostly dry stuff, how to address nobles, ink conservation, proper spacing on edicts. But buried in chapter 12 is a strange instruction. When sketching His Majesty for official portraits, depict the right shoe with clarity and pride. The left, if present, should be subdued. Do not embellish. Why? Because even in image symmetry was considered too mortal, too ordinary. An emperor must appear anchored in heaven, and heaven, according to some interpretations of the Zhou cosmology, moves in arcs, not mirror images. The left foot is the echo, the shadow, the unseen. That's a little unsettling, but it gets weirder. In a scroll from the archives of the Southern Song dynasty, a court artist named Wen Li describes painting the emperor for a mural intended to be viewed only by the inner court. In his notes, he agonizes over how to render the footwear. I was told not to show the left shoe at all. They said it invites disorder, but when I left it out, His Majesty appeared to float ghost-like off the ground. So I shaded it faintly, almost as a whisper. The Grand Tutor approved. So let's add phantom footwear to the list, shall we? Historians still argue whether these deliberate omissions reflect a genuine mystical belief, or whether they were merely visual shorthand for power. Was the left shoe less important or too important to show? As you peer closer into the records, a pattern begins to emerge. In the records of imperial gifts, we find numerous entries like right shoe embroidered with sun motif presented to the Prince of Liang. Left shoe untouched, returned to the treasury for preservation. Right slipper offered at altar during harvest rite. Left removed from ceremony by instruction of the High Diviner. Removed, preserved, avoided. You can't help but picture an entire staff of assistants whispering about what to do with the second shoe. Do they hide it in a drawer? Lock it in a box? Burn it under moonlight and hope the emperor doesn't ask? And then, because no archive is complete without drama, comes the scandal. A court record from the mid-Ming dynasty details the dismissal of a footman, yes, that was his title, who mistakenly handed the emperor 2 left shoes before a spring festival. The official report reads, His Majesty stumbled thrice upon the marble bridge. The omen was declared grave. The footman confessed. He was reassigned to melon storage. Melon storage, that's one cold exile. The same document reports that following this incident, a new position was created, right slipper examiner, responsible solely for inspecting and organizing right foot footwear before all public appearances. It was an honor. It was also reportedly a nightmare job. Why? Because of the replicas. That's right. There were decoy shoes. In the Qing archives, there are mentions of mirror pairs, custom-made slippers, where both were designed to look like right shoes. From a distance, no one could tell. The emperor could wear both without breaking cosmic rules or appearing unbalanced. One entry even describes a pair made for the Qianlong emperor, both marked R in tiny stitched characters. A fashion trick or a metaphysical safety net, probably both. Of course no system is perfect. A legend from the late Qing tells of a nobleman who gifted the emperor a pair of elaborately embroidered dragon boots, only to realize too late that both were lefts. The emperor, in a rare moment of humor, reportedly wore one anyway, then wrote a poem titled, Even the dragon may turn left when the stars misalign. Iconic. Now among all these oddities, there's one scroll that truly pulls you into the twilight zone. It's labeled simply Instructions for Ascension. No date, no author. But the script is formal, precise. It describes step by step how the emperor should prepare his body and clothing before death. It includes details on robes, jewelry, incense, and shoes. The right foot shall be shod in phoenix thread and jade lining. The left shall be bare. This invites the soul's rising without tether. Wrap it gently in mooncloth. Bind with no knots. You read it twice. The afterlife apparently requires different footwear etiquette. Or maybe the same one just taken to its final weightless form. So even in death, the left foot remains separate, quiet, unburdened, left out, and yet still present. You glance around this silent archive, imagining the shadows of all those slippers stored, catalogued, or hidden away. An entire unseen history, stitched in silk and mystery. And then something nearly forgotten. In a corner shelf behind rows of wooden filing trays lies a slim, pale box. The label has faded, but you can still make out 3 brush-stroked characters, Weita Ji Lu, the unstepped shoe. Inside, a single silk slipper size, small left foot only, never worn, kept pristine under a layer of rosewood ash. According to the tiny tag inside, it was intended for the last emperor of the Ming dynasty. It was sent to him during the siege of Beijing, meant to be worn during his final prayer before the city fell. He never put it on. The left shoe was left behind, a pause in history, a breath never taken. And now it rests here, neither used nor buried, waiting perhaps for a step that never came. You step away from the archives with a chill you can't quite shake, like you've just heard someone whisper your name from a dark hallway. That left shoe, curled forever in silk and ash, still lingers behind your eyes. But as you glide back into the brighter courtyards, the forbidden city slowly exhales. Life resumes. Wind rustles through pine needles. A servant somewhere scolds a lazy duck. And it's here beneath a tilted stone pavilion, with carved rafters shaped like tigers and turtles, that you find the threads of something stranger still, the early Chinese metaphysical movements. Because while the official records give us what the mystics, poets, and wandering monks give us the why. So let's talk about Taoism, fortune bones, and barefoot enlightenment. You're going to need both feet for this part, but we're still focusing on the left. First, imagine this. It's the Warring States period and you're in the mountains. You haven't bathed in a week, you've eaten nothing but pine bark tea, and the Taoist sage you're following refuses to speak in full sentences. Instead, he mumbles about unbinding form and occasionally hits you with a fan made of dried frog skin. Charming guy. One morning, you see him put on a straw sandal, only on his right foot. When you ask why he smiles and says the left walks with heaven, it does not need help. This might sound like nonsense. It probably is. But it also tracks with deeper spiritual beliefs from ancient China. In Taoist cosmology, the left side of the body often represents the yin, passive, receptive, lunar. The right side, yang, active, directive, solar. The two aren't enemies, they're complements. Together they create harmony. But balance requires differentiation. Equal treatment can actually disrupt the flow. So some monks and mystics chose to walk unevenly, one foot covered, one bare, always the left exposed, always in quiet places. Why? So the left foot, the yin receptor, could stay in touch, literally, with the earth's energy. They believed qi flowed more cleanly when the body wasn't fully encased. One sandal off, one path open. And here's the kicker, this wasn't just limited to ascetics in the mountains. Emperors during the Han dynasty were known to secretly consult with these mystics, not through formal court channels. Of course, officially, everything was Confucian, bureaucratic, dull. But late at night in candlelit studies, imperial robes were quietly loosened, shoes removed, and strange conversations began. There's a scroll dated to 105 BCE, titled Record of the Emperor's Whisper. It describes a midnight visit from a Taoist alchemist who refused to enter the palace unless he could remain unshod, specifically left foot only. The court guards panicked. The emperor said, "Let him walk as he walks." The alchemist apparently looked at the emperor's slippers and laughed. "Ah," he said, "you've already begun." Historians still argue whether this moment actually happened, or whether it's just another mystical tale that grew legs and one bare foot. Either way, it shaped policy. Within a generation, we see multiple edicts protecting singular dress among seekers of the way. It was like spiritual diplomatic immunity, with odd footwear. And then there's the feng shui factor. You know feng shui, arrange your furniture to improve energy flow. Hang a mirror to reflect prosperity. Never put your bed where your feet face the door unless you want to invite ghosts. Well, it goes deeper than living rooms. In imperial feng shui, the emperor's movement through space was meticulously calculated. Every step had meaning. Every direction, alignment, and rotation mattered. His left side was considered his shadow path, the unseen ripple of his presence. One manual kept in the palace under the Department of Auspicious Alignments. Yes, that was real, includes diagrams showing how the emperor's left foot must never touch cold tile before a major ceremony. They heated the floors accordingly. Not the whole floor, just a precise left foot span. One poor steward in 1623 forgot this detail. The emperor caught a chill and postponed a festival. The steward's punishment, assigned to mirror polishing duty for a year. Do you know how many mirrors were in the palace? Let's just say too many. Another belief held that the left shoe, if worn too early in the day, could cause an imbalance of cloud energy. This sounds ridiculous until you read that palace astrologers once delayed the release of official tax reforms because the emperor had accidentally stepped outside in full slippers before the morning incense had burned halfway down. Talk about a wardrobe malfunction with consequences. Even the robes played along. One Ming Dynasty ceremonial outfit features an embroidered wave pattern rising higher on the left side of the hem, symbolizing hidden potential, passive strength, submerged power. The wearer literally carried an imbalance by design. So how do shoes fit into this perfectly? Some ceremonial sets included a left slipper that was soft, thin, and made of more pliable fabric, intended to be slipped on only during transitions. The right would be firmer for walking, stomping, asserting. The left for gliding. Think of it like this: the right says, "Here I am." The left whispers, "I know where I'm going." And if that still feels a little vague, let's visit a tomb. In a Han Dynasty burial site outside modern-day Xi'an, archaeologists discovered a remarkably preserved noble's coffin. Alongside jade ring scroll fragments and a lacquer comb were two tiny shoes, one made of wood and copper thread, the other silk, thin as mist. Left and right, heavy and light, deliberate imbalance. Some say it was symbolic of the soul's need to step into the next life lightly. Others believe it was a nod to the celestial court, where the left side of the body would be weighed against a feather. Sound familiar Egyptian mythology had the same idea. Maybe the world's ancient souls were all in conversation. Maybe they still are. Meanwhile, somewhere in the archives is a half-translated Taoist fragment that simply reads, "The left is not for treading. It is for sensing, for seeking. When shod, it closes. When free, it listens." No comment from modern podiatrists, but there's something deliciously strange about it all. The idea that something as mundane as a shoe could hold the keys to harmony. That slipping on the wrong one might knock your soul slightly out of orbit. That barefootedness wasn't laziness, but strategy. And somewhere perhaps in an incense-laced courtyard, long lost to time, a sleepy emperor once tiptoed over warm stone tiles, right foot cloaked in gold, left one bare, listening not to footsteps, but to the quiet. Your path takes you deeper now, not just into history, but into ritual. Into a world of incense smoke, whispering bells, and long winding ceremonies where every gesture has meaning and every footstep must land exactly where it is supposed to or not supposed to. And yes, we're still watching that left foot like it owes us money. You pass through a red lacquered gate flanked by stone lions with mismatched eyes and find yourself in the ceremonial courtyard. It's wide, empty. Polished tiles stretch out like a chessboard for giants. Here, emperors performed rites that tethered heaven to earth, sacrifices, proclamations, anointings, the kinds of things that required costumes more complicated than modern spacecraft. And once again, the shoes, those unassuming silk wrappers, hold surprising power. Let's start with the basics. Ceremonial footwear for emperors wasn't designed for comfort. It wasn't even really designed for walking. They were stiff, ornate, embroidered with clouds cranes or the mythical Bixia chimera that devours evil spirits, and sometimes, depending on the dynasty, your ability to balance. Here's where it gets fun. The regulations of ceremonial apparel from the Tang dynasty specify that for certain seasonal rituals, the emperor must enter the sacred space with only the right shoe fully secured. The left must remain untied or lightly draped. Why? Because tying both shoes was seen as closing the loop. You can't summon blessings into a closed circuit. You must leave a gate open symbolically so fortune can flow in. That gate, the untied left slipper, So yes, the emperor of the known world literally hobbled into the most sacred ceremonies with one floppy shoe. And don't think people didn't notice. One Confucian official even complained in a memo that the ritual resembled an ox with one horn wrapped in cloth. Brutal. He was reassigned to horse registry analysis, which for the record involved counting horsetails by moonlight. But the custom remained. Fast forward to the Yuan dynasty, and you find a new twist: special court shoes known as shadow steps. These had soles made of alternating layers, wood and silk, so that one foot, guess which, would make a softer sound on the ceremonial floor. The goal: a right heavy rhythm. 1, 2, 1, soft, 2. Even the soundscape was asymmetric, like a living heartbeat, like the emperor was a metronome for the cosmos. And that's not metaphor. An actual document from the Yuan court notes. The emperor's steps are to reflect the heavenly beat, assertive then receptive. To step equally is to insult the stars. Historians still argue whether this was a genuine metaphysical concern, or just a way to prevent imperial robes from tripping over themselves on marble stairs. But when you add in the sound, the rhythm, the sheer choreography, something deeper begins to emerge. Let's talk about processionals. Imagine hundreds of people moving in absolute silence, except for the rhythmic drag of silk, the occasional jingle of tassels, and the steady beat of one royal foot. Right echo, and the left still there, just quieter, subtler, unclenched, almost performing its own dance. We even have records of training manuals for court attendants that instruct them on how to walk slightly out of step with the emperor, so his rhythm would always dominate. One attendant wrote, "The hardest part was not the weight of the robes or the heat of the sun, but remembering that my left foot must always follow, never lead." Power dynamics, even in footsteps. And just when you think this might all be symbolic fluff along, comes a curious account from the Ming dynasty that makes it feel a little more corporeal. A physician assigned to the emperor's personal staff kept a secret log of his patients' habits. Hidden among dietary notes and reports of wind trapped in the liver is a strange entry. His Majesty favors his right side. The left foot is often bare in private chambers. He walks unevenly in meditation by choice. I am told this prevents the fire from rising too quickly to the head. So now we're talking about literal body heat, energy flow, and ancient Chinese medical theories. In traditional Chinese medicine, the left and right sides of the body are believed to govern different internal systems. Stimulating one while grounding the other was thought to help with clarity, balance, and even dream stability. Yes, dream stability. There's a Qing-era court practice where emperors were encouraged to sleep with their left foot uncovered to promote lucid imperial dreams. You can't make this stuff up. One emperor reportedly took it so seriously, he had a custom quilt made embroidered in gold, lined in goose down with a cutout on the lower left side. The imperial cobbler was furious. The dream interpreter, overjoyed. This blending of fashion, function, and philosophy bleeds into every part of court life. Consider this nugget from a spring equinox festival. At the stroke of midnight, the emperor would rise from his bed, be led to a garden pavilion lit by lanterns shaped like peaches, and plant a single sprig of early plum. But he was not allowed to wear matching shoes. The reason? To remind him and the universe that harmony grows from contrast, that spring emerges from imbalance, that a perfect world is never perfectly symmetrical. Even the peach blossoms nodded in agreement, or maybe that was the wind. Of course not all rituals worked out as planned. There's a story from the late Ming period, where an emperor, tired, moody, possibly full of undercooked duck, refused to wear the ceremonial left slipper for the harvest blessing. He tossed it across the garden and muttered, "Let heaven walk barefoot for once." The next week, a freak hailstorm wiped out 20% of the imperial wheat reserves. Coincidence, probably. Did the grand astrologer still write a 42-page report connecting footwear to celestial frost patterns? Absolutely. And the emperor never skipped the left shoe again, even if he didn't fully put it on. Let's pause for a second and appreciate this entire weather system's court appointments and midnight plum rituals hinged somehow on which foot wore what and when. If that sounds absurd, that's because it is. But it's also beautiful. There's something quietly profound about a civilization that builds metaphysical weight into the soft crease of a silk slipper. These weren't just shoes. They were thresholds. They were questions. They were quite literally the steps between heaven and earth. So next time you get dressed and accidentally put on the wrong shoe, first, don't fret. Just tell the universe you're aligning your energy for a more harmonious harvest. You lean against a smooth, sun-warmed wall of the inner court, letting everything settle. The incense, the uneven footfalls, the ghostly flicker of half-worn slippers. It's almost too much, but the Forbidden City doesn't let go that easily. You're in now, caught in the threadbare folds of its secret logic. So let's keep walking carefully, right foot first. Because this next corridor, it's filled with contradictions. We've seen how the left foot, bare, soft untied, echoes through mystic rites and spiritual rhythm. But now you're about to stumble into a tension that nearly split the empire in silk fashion versus function. Yep, we're talking about how the imperial obsession with symmetry collided headfirst with the ancient belief in intentional imbalance. And let's just say, the tailors weren't happy. Start here, the Qing dynasty. Specifically a 1740 memo from the Imperial Bureau of Robes titled Guidelines for Ceremonial Dress Assembly, Spring Equinox Edition. You'd think it'd be boring, but about 3 paragraphs in you find a tiny red mark next to a line that reads, both left and right shoes must feature identical embroidery, 5 cranes facing forward. Someone, likely the head ritual officer, has scribbled in the margin, but are the cranes facing the same heaven? A joke maybe, but one that captures the problem beautifully. See, during the mid-Qing period, imperial fashion entered a golden age. Silks became stiffer embroidery, more elaborate. We're talking thread spun from peacock feathers soles, reinforced with sandalwood, even microscopic seed pearls embedded into heel seams. Shoes weren't just worn, they were flaunted. Matching pairs became a symbol of precision of divine right made manifest in fabric. 2 shoes, 2 feet, 1 perfect mirror. Any deviation a flaw, a threat. Except the ritual book still said, leave the left untied. Make the step uneven. Let 1 foot breathe. Cue drama. A famed incident in 1743 saw 2 court departments, the Ministry of Rites and the Wardrobe Division, descend into a silent bureaucratic war over a single phrase, symmetrical procession attire. The rituals team argued it was metaphorical. The tailors, very literal. They began producing perfectly mirrored shoes for every ceremonial outfit. But when the emperor put them on, things went wrong. Small things. The processions no longer flowed. The rhythm was off. One eunuch noted in his journal it was like watching a poem read backward. This may seem poetic, but trust imperial life was all about appearance. So when something subtle fell out of sync, alarms rang. The emperor himself, Qianlong, the art collector, the poet, the man who thought 30 calligraphy seals on a painting wasn't excessive, felt the difference. After a harvest ceremony left him slightly dizzy and unusually irritable, he ordered a review of ritual footwear. The investigation concluded that the shoes were too symmetrical, not in color, in energy. So Qianlong, in an act of imperial whimsy or cosmic sensitivity, depending on who you ask, reinstated the asymmetry rule. But now it was fashionable. The left shoe would always be made of softer silk, the embroidery slightly more abstract, the heel just a hair lower. Suddenly, shoemakers were artisans of balance through imbalance, and the court loved it. One artisan from Suzhou became so famous for his intentional imperfection that nobles began commissioning unbalanced slippers for themselves, left side only, of course. His secret: he'd slip a single lotus petal into the silk layers of the left shoe. You'd never see it, but you'd feel it. He called them whisper slippers. And yes, we have records of a waiting list, 10 years long. This leads us to a curious social shift. As court culture mirrored the emperor's preferences, elite families began adopting asymmetric footwear for status. But here's the catch. It only worked if it looked symmetrical to outsiders. The trick was in the materials. A heavy satin right shoe, a whisper soft left. On the surface identical. Inside, opposites. It was fashion camouflage for the spiritually savvy. You'd walk through a courtyard, and unless someone really knew their fabrics or had a foot fetish, they'd never guess your imbalance. But you'd feel the difference. You'd know. And that subtle knowledge became intoxicating. It wasn't just about shoes anymore. It was a philosophy stitched into the soul. Enter the courtiers. Gossip swirled through the ranks. Was Minister Zhang's left shoe too soft? Did Lady Hua switch her feet entirely for dramatic effect? One concubine, clever, unranked, and chronically bored, reportedly wore 2 left shoes to see what would happen. Nothing did. But a week later, she was promoted. Coincidence, maybe. Or maybe the emperor just appreciated the audacity. Historians still argue whether this asymmetry chic influenced political decisions. Probably not directly. But fashion and influence always dance close. Even Confucian scholars, usually the fun police of history, got involved. One stern treatise from 1761 reads, "He who balances too perfectly walks in circles. Let the path be uneven, that it may reach its end." That could be deep wisdom, or the world's earliest excuse for tripping on your robe. But what about the commoners? Did the trend trickle down? Sort of. In a classic case of monkey see peasant modify wealthy merchants began commissioning asymmetrical shoes, not for cosmic reasons, but because it was trending. One Guangzhou cobbler became famous for selling imperial imbalances, half-weighted shoes that made you feel slightly off-kilter. People said it improved posture, or at least made you walk like you had something to think about. Meanwhile, the working class developed their own spin single-padded soles. You'd line the right shoe with extra cloth, so the left foot always felt closer to the ground. Why some said it helped you stay alert. Others believed it kept evil spirits from hitching a ride on your dominant side. Remember, in Chinese superstition, spirits are sneaky, and they love hitching rides. All of this court drama, cobbler fads, ghost shoes points to a fascinating truth. The Chinese Empire was built on contradictions it refused to resolve. Harmony wasn't sameness. It was tension held steady by ritual belief and just enough slipper drama to keep things interesting. The emperor might wear embroidered dragons and sit on a throne carved from meteorite, but his left shoe was soft, maybe untied, maybe almost falling off, and that made him more powerful, not less. So you keep walking, your steps uneven, one light, one firm, and suddenly the echo behind you doesn't sound like your own footsteps anymore. You pause near a long red-painted hallway, a whispering tunnel of shadows and silence. Above, paper lanterns sway, gently casting peach-coloured ovals on the polished stones. The air smells of pine smoke and old cedar. You take a deep breath. Your shoes, whatever you've imagined them to be by now, press unevenly into the floor. Left soft, right firm. The beat continues. But where does it go? This time, not to a ceremony, not to a throne room or moonlit peach orchard. Tonight, you're trailing the emperor's shoes into the private chambers, behind the golden screens and silk blinds, into the parts of the palace where history breathes quieter, softer, stranger, because you're about to discover how left shoes or their suspicious absence played a role in imperial dream spheres and the absolute chaos of bedroom politics. Step lightly, this gets weird. Let's begin with a question the palace never officially answered. Why did the emperor's sleeping quarters always contain exactly one extra right shoe? Yes, one, not a pair. Tucked beside the bed, laid out with care, often adorned with a fresh tassel or a painted cloud motif. It sat silently waiting, like a placeholder for someone or something that never arrived. At first glance, it might seem practical. If the emperor rose in the night and only needed one shoe for a trip to the moon gate, sure makes sense. But dig deeper, and you'll find layers of symbolism that court historians refuse to document, yet still danced around in poetic footnotes. One account scribbled in the personal diary of a eunuch named Wen Shu notes, His Majesty requests the extra right shoe be scented with camphor. Left shoes are forbidden near the sleeping mat except on the foot. This detail alone throws open the curtain on a strange tradition, one that suggests something more than comfort or convenience. Let's rewind a bit. In Taoist, sleep rituals, yes, those existed. The body, during sleep, is considered partially detached from the soul. You're floating somewhere between the mortal realm and the spirit world, and certain things are believed to keep you tethered. One of them, the grounding influence of the right foot. The right side of the body in Taoist mysticism is associated with clarity fire, the active soul. The left side, shadow intuition dream work. So by placing a single right shoe beside the bed, the emperor was supposedly anchoring his conscious spirit, letting the dreams wander while ensuring he'd still wake up human. Quirky definitely, but it gets better. One sleep guardian. A woman from a long lineage of palace dream readers once told a young consort that the emperor's left shoe was hidden from the dream foxes. Dream foxes, you heard that right. In Chinese folklore, fox spirits often sneak into dreams, seducing or confusing sleepers, especially emperors who carried the dreams of the nation on their shoulders. The belief was that these mischievous entities could enter through the left shoe if it remained too close at night. Solution: ban it, remove it, burn it if necessary. Some emperors took this to heart. One Ming ruler reportedly had all left shoes removed from his personal wing at sunset. They were locked in a lacquered cabinet by the guards, and a charm was placed on the door that read, "Let no fox wear my shadow." Strangely poetic, right? Historians still argue whether these practices were rooted in actual belief, or were simply expressions of deeper fears, loss of control, paranoia, or the blurred line between the emperor's symbolic perfection and his very mortal nightmares. Because these guys didn't sleep well. They ruled hundreds of millions, navigated betrayal on the daily, and carried centuries of prophecy on their backs. A misplaced slipper that could feel like a breach in the cosmic firewall. Let's not forget dreams mattered in China. They weren't just background noise. They were interpreted, charted, even ranked by importance. And yes, dreams about shoes, especially missing shoes, were red flags. One dream manual from the Song Dynasty notes: to lose the left shoe in a dream is to lose intuition. To wear only the right is to see too much. The wise man wakes barefoot. This might explain the rise of a peculiar bedtime ritual, the soft unshoeing. According to scattered texts, the emperor would remove his right shoe before bed, but not his left. The left would be taken off only once he was fully lying down by a specific attendant trained to whisper a short incantation during the act. No one remembers the words. They've vanished into the robes of time. But the gesture, it lingered. And then there's the matter of dreams shared. One rare account from the early Qing period describes a sleep experiment conducted in secret. Two consorts were told to sleep in mirrored chambers wearing matching robes, but only one was allowed to keep her left shoe nearby. Over weeks, their dreams were recorded, compared, and analysed. The result? The left shoeless consort reportedly had dreams clearer, longer, and more full of words. She even dreamed of a white crane delivering imperial edicts from a silver scroll. The other woman mostly dreamed of getting lost in gardens. Correlation, coincidence? Scholars disagree. But the story spread, and for years afterward, imperial lovers began tucking left shoes under distant pillows or burying them under nightgowns to soften the dreams. But what about the emperor himself? Some nights he apparently broke tradition. A note from a frustrated night guard tells us, His Majesty walked the moon path barefoot on both sides. No shoe was requested, left or right. He said the ground was warm. No context, no explanation, just a barefoot stroll under palace moonlight. Make of that what you will. Still across dynasties, one pattern remained. The left shoe was always treated as more spiritually volatile, closer to dreams, to the unconscious, to mischief, which might explain one of the most bizarre practices of all the left slipper burnings. In times of crisis, plague rebellion, celestial omens, the emperor would sometimes order all his worn left slippers to be gathered and burned in a secluded courtyard. One record says, "The fire must be of pine. The flames must touch no other garment. When the ashes fall in the shape of a circle, peace returns." Do ashes actually fall in circles? Not usually, but that's the magic of ritual. It doesn't have to make sense. It has to feel like it does. So now, as you drift through this darkened hallway, its walls humming with the weight of dreams, you imagine the pile of old silk slippers smouldering under a sky choked with stars. You imagine the emperor in his moonlit bed, one shoe gone, the other humming quietly beside him. And maybe, just maybe, you wonder what kind of dream you'd have if you left one shoe behind tonight. You move past the sleeping quarters steps slower now, half lulled by soft lantern light and the lingering whispers of dream foxes. The palace has folded in on itself like origami creased by time. And here in this curl of shadowed stone and painted silk, you find yourself at the feet of something both strange and strangely mundane. The imperial laundry. Yes, laundry, because even emperors' sons of heaven, wielders of dragon seals, sweat through their socks. And this humble truth, like all good secrets, leads you deeper into the left shoe mystery. Down a side hall, you go past racks of stiff ceremonial robes that smell faintly of cedar and cloves, until you reach the laundry bureau's back wing. Here among wash basins, the size of bathtubs, and drying lines strung with gold-threaded undergarments, lies the shoes of Record Vault. Sounds dramatic, right? But it's real. Or at least, it used to be. Palace records show that the laundry bureau was responsible for not just cleaning footwear, but cataloguing it down to the stitch. And every shoe that touched the emperor's foot, logged, rotated, preserved or destroyed with painstaking ritual. But here's where things get weird. The left shoes were always processed separately. Marked, tagged, sometimes even laundered on different days. One surviving document from the late Ming period outlines the weekly washing schedule for imperial garments. Page 4 reads, Tuesday outer robes right footwear, Thursday inner robes left footwear, caution burn incense near basin. Why the separation? Some historians argue it was purely practical. Left shoes, often softer or looser, needed different handling. But others more fun historians suggest the shoes absorbed different energies. That left shoes closer to the spiritual self could carry fragments of mood intention, even illness. Hence the incense. The separation. The low murmur of a ritual you weren't supposed to call a ritual. One anonymous staff note scrawled in the margin of a work log reads, Tien used wrong basin. Left shoe soaked in right water. Emperor was irritable all day. Coincidence? Or another example of how everyday acts were tied to cosmic balance. The laundry staff certainly took no chances. In one legendary incident during the early Qing, a misplaced pair of ceremonial slippers, 2 rights no left, caused a 15-minute delay in the emperor's procession to the spring festival altar. He refused to walk until the correct imbalance was restored. A eunuch sprinted to the laundry, found the missing left, returned breathless, and only then did the ceremony begin. That poor eunuch was later promoted. Now this brings us to another facet of the mystery imperial shoemakers and their collaboration or occasional passive-aggressive warfare with the laundry bureau. See, shoemakers designed for symmetry in look but not in feel. They had to. The emperor's left shoe was often made half a size looser or with thinner inner lining. But if the laundry staff washed both identically, that balance was ruined. The left became stiff. The emperor noticed. Cue chaos. One 1728 complaint reads, The left silk has lost its softness. The emperor stepped, frowned and paused. This is unacceptable. From this point on, left shoes were handled by senior washers only. These weren't just scrubbing staff. They were textile alchemists. Experts in silk memory goat hair brushes and water temperature so precise it bordered on obsession. They even developed a signature rinse known as jade wash, infused with crushed lotus leaves and wintergreen oil to preserve the subtle yield of left foot fabric. And yes, it cost a fortune, but it paid off. Some emperors could tell with their eyes closed if their left shoe had been washed by the junior or senior team. Why? Because the body remembers. The foot in particular remembers its shell. And when that shell changed even by the weight of a raindrop, the step changed too. Which leads us to a quirky court superstition, the misstep omen. This was the belief that a poorly balanced left shoe, too tight, too stiff, or heaven forbid, swapped with a right could cause not just physical discomfort but political fallout. One Ming empress reportedly had a dream of her husband tripping while climbing the palace stairs. She awoke and demanded a review of his entire shoe rotation. 3 slippers were burned that morning. Did it prevent disaster? Who knows? But within weeks, the emperor issued a shockingly lenient edict lowering rice taxes for 3 provinces. Coincidence, sure. Or maybe the foot did know something. Now, speaking of quirks, let's talk about the one sock rule. During certain rainy months, the emperor would wear a single silken sock on the right foot only. The left remained bare inside the slipper. Why? Because dampness was believed to make the spiritual body slippery, and the right sock was thought to anchor the yang essence. The left foot exposed was seen as a receiver of Earth's changing mood. We have a fascinating fringe record of one emperor writing, "Today the air felt strange. I added a second left shoe and the whispers stopped." Wait, a second left shoe? Oh yes, let's get into that. A rarely discussed practice whispered of mostly in laundress diaries, and the occasional odd poem is the double left ritual. Essentially, 2 left shoes were worn at once stacked or layered on the emperor's non-dominant foot. Why? The reasons vary. Some say it was a form of magical shielding during eclipses or comet sightings. Others believe it was punishment or penance, a way to humble the dragon step. One dramatic record claims that during a particularly volatile year, plague, rebellion and locusts all at once, the emperor ordered 5 pairs of left slippers made from white hemp and worn without right shoes for 5 days. He called it walking through the wind of ghosts, and he survived. Now, of course, some scholars wave this off as poetic nonsense. Emperors had superstitions they shrug. Big deal. But those shoes, some of them survived. Locked away in museum vaults or shrine basements, they tell a different story. The left shoes are always more worn, more fragile, the soles thinner, the fabric stretched just so, as if they bore more than weight, as if they bore memory. And the laundry staff, bless them, knew that. They whispered to the shoes, rubbed them with oils. Sometimes they wept into them. One final confession recorded from a dying palace servant reads, "I washed the left slipper of the Son of Heaven with tears." May his step remain guided. So maybe a little of that energy lingers. And as you walk now, feet quiet against the cool tile, you realize your own step has changed. Your right foot leads. Your left follows, softer, slower, imperfect, intentional, just the way the emperor liked it. You're getting used to it now, the soft shuffle, the right foot forward rhythm. The sense that every step you take is echoing a path worn centuries ago. The palace feels different tonight. Less vast, more internal. Like you've passed some invisible threshold, and now walk not through halls of stone and silk, but through memory itself. You round a corner, and the scent changes burnt myrrh dust, and something sharp and metallic. Ahead, torches flicker against carved beams. You've entered a wing of judgment, of balance. And balance for the emperor didn't just mean governance. It meant walking the line between worlds. And for that he had help. Because the emperor never walked alone, not even in dreams. Let's talk about the Imperial Foot Guides, a job title so obscure and strange you'd be forgiven for thinking it was made up. But no, these were real people. Their job to teach the emperor how to walk. Not as a child, though. That may have been part of it, but as a ruler. With purpose, with gravity, with exactly the right symbolic distribution of power between the left and right leg. Sounds ridiculous. It kind of is. But that's what makes it perfect. You see, in Chinese court rituals, every movement had meaning. A glance, a breath, the angle of a bow. So it only made sense eventually that walking itself would become encoded with politics and cosmology. The right foot was yang, assertive, direct, masculine. The left foot was yin, receptive, internal, intuitive. And so, the imperial stride had to be carefully orchestrated to reflect the harmony between the two. Too heavy on the right, the emperor looked aggressive, impatient. Too slow on the left, weak, indecisive. So the foot guides stepped in. These were usually older eunuchs with years of ritual training, or occasionally Taoist monks brought in from mountain temples for specific ceremonies. They didn't just coach gait, they studied pulse posture and palace astrology. One guide's personal manual, recovered centuries later in a collapsed storage vault, begins with the line, "If the emperor limps in soul, the kingdom limps in law." A bit dramatic, but you get the idea. Training sessions happened in private courtyards, pebble-paved, enclosed, and often watched silently by an audience of servants who would never speak of what they saw. The sessions could be brutal. One report from the Yongle Emperor's reign mentions him walking in silence for 6 hours while wearing mismatched shoes, one velvet, one hemp, to test his duality. He fell, twice, refused water, finally collapsed on a bench and whispered, "Now I understand the edge." No one knew what he meant. But the next day he ordered a reform to the Ministry of Labour. Coincidence? Possibly. But the foot guides kept records, long ones. In their scrolls, each emperor's gait was described in poetic metaphor. He walks like frost over bamboo, quiet but firm. He limps, not in flesh but in favor. The left leads too often. He dreams too long. Let's pause on that last one. The left leads too often. It was considered a dangerous imbalance. Too much yin in the imperial walk meant a ruler governed from emotion, not order. That his dreams whispered louder than his generals. So sometimes a foot guide would recommend a temporary restriction left shoes banned during court appearances. It wasn't official, never written, but it happened. The emperor would glide down the jade steps wearing only a right shoe and a soft leather sole under the left foot nearly invisible. It was enough to make the weight shift, and the ministers noticed. One scholar wrote in his diary, "The emperor's gait was bold today, a sure omen of swift decisions. Indeed, we lost 3 governors before noon." Yikes! Now, while some of this was performative politics as theatre, there were times the left shoe suppression became psychological. One emperor in the late Ming dynasty grew obsessed with his forward lean. He believed his left foot betrayed him, pulling him towards sentimental errors. So he had a stone shoe made, left only, heavy cold inscribed with prayers. He wore it in private walks through the dew garden, every night, until one day he left it by the koi pond and declared, "The shadow of my step no longer frightens me." The koi died the next morning. Draw your own conclusions. Meanwhile, the foot guides developed a series of meditative steps known as cloud marching. Imagine Tai Chi, but with more poetry and fewer swords. Each movement had a name. First shadow, the lifted heel, passing wind, the shifted weight, breath of jade, the landing. It was graceful, dreamlike, but more importantly, it subtly conditioned the emperor to become conscious of his steps, and by extension his choices. There's a quiet brilliance in that. You begin to realize this wasn't about shoes anymore. Not really. It was about awareness. Where you plant your weight, what foot you lead with. Whether you're acting from instinct or intention, the left shoe just a symbol. A little thread tugging at the emperor's deeper self. But even symbols have their scandals. During the short reign of a teenage emperor, more petulant than poetic, he once threw both shoes into the lotus pond and demanded to be carried everywhere for a week. "Let the ministers carry my decisions as well," he reportedly said. He was overruled within days. The shoes were retrieved. The foot guides gave him a look that even centuries later still feels like a sigh. Sometimes you really just want to roll your eyes at royalty, but other times it's hard not to admire their odd quiet wisdom. In the end, every step the emperor took across stone over silk into war or peace was part of a ritual dance older than memory. And always that dance was guided, sometimes by right shoes, sometimes by left, always by someone watching. And now as you step forward once more, your own stride seems subtly changed, more conscious, not faster but fuller. As if in listening to ancient shoes, your own have learned something. Maybe tomorrow you'll walk differently, maybe not. But for now, let the floor cool beneath your heel. Let the night lean gently on your left side. And trust your next step. The night folds deeper around you now. The palace has gone hushed again, the kind of hush you only get when even the ghosts are sleeping. The air is soft and slow, and your breath sounds louder than it should. Every stone you pass seems like it remembers something. And now as your fingers brush the lacquered edge of a carved doorway, you find yourself stepping into the strangest room yet. A library, but not just any library. This one is circular with shelves like spokes of a wheel. In the center, under a cone of dim starlight filtered through a paper-covered skylight, sits a single display pedestal. On it, a shoe. Just one. Left. You're starting to see a pattern, huh? This room is known in obscure court notes as the Archive of Embodied Forms. But, unofficially, it went by a quieter name among staff, the step room. A place where objects worn by emperors, especially shoes, were preserved not for their appearance, but for what they represented. They believed a shoe could record not just where an emperor had walked, but who he was when he walked there. Which is why this particular left shoe, the one under glass, is so unnerving. Because it's tiny, child-sized, made from pale red silk, with cloud and pearl embroidery, barely the width of your thumb. The inside heel is lined with rabbit fur, the kind only used for high winter robes. But it's the scuffed sole that draws your eyes. This was worn, used, Not by a grown man playing dress-up with ceremony, but by an emperor as a child, likely during his first formal procession, which leads us to one of the more haunting practices of imperial training, left foot discipline. This was a program equal parts ritual and psychological shaping used to prepare future emperors for the weight of their position. And it always began with the left shoe. As early as age 5, crown princes were given special left shoes, deliberately uncomfortable, sometimes too tight, sometimes uneven. The goal to force awareness, to teach them that every step of power comes with imbalance. Imagine that. A child taught not to walk confidently, but to walk cautiously, to always feel the ground through just one foot. It was poetic, sure, but also a little cruel. There's an old record of one young heir barely 6 who tried to throw his left shoe across the courtyard during morning lessons. A tutor caught it mid-air, smiled, and said, "When the shoe flies, the burden doubles." The boy cried, but the next morning he wore the shoe and never took it off without bowing to it first. Historians still argue whether this whole left foot discipline system was more spiritual teaching or psychological conditioning. Was it about humility or control? Some scholars claim it was a form of gentle indoctrination, a way to plant the idea that leadership meant discomfort, and that a wise ruler never ignored the nagging rub of conscience. Others say it was meant to separate the emperor from common experience right from the start. If every other child walked freely, but he limped, then he would grow into his own legend. But let's get weird again, shall we? There are whispers only found in fringe scrolls and speculative essays that some of these left shoes weren't just uncomfortable, they were ritually sealed, meaning the shoe was stitched with a hidden prayer strip inside the lining, often soaked in powdered jade and then blessed by a Taoist monk. The blessing wasn't for protection, it was for entanglement. It was meant to bond the child emperor's soul to the weight of the role. One particularly unsettling passage from the Book of Subtle Bodies says, "The jade thread beneath the heel binds the heart of heaven to the step of earth. Let the left shoe teach sorrow, that the right may lead in clarity." That same passage was reportedly burned from several official texts during the Qing dynasty, but too late. The practice lingered. In fact, there's evidence that emperors well into adulthood kept their childhood left shoes hidden in private altars, never worn again, but never discarded. One emperor reportedly brought his with him to military campaigns, not to wear, but to speak to. Every night he'd light a single candle, place the shoe in front of it and whisper, "What would the boy choose? What would you choose?" The idea of preserving old discomfort to measure present power is unsettling, but also kind of profound. And it wasn't just the emperors who engaged in this. The tutors, the court scholars, even some guards had to learn. Weighted gait, a discipline where one foot, usually the left, was trained to move with a deliberate half-second delay. It made their step uneven, slightly hesitant, but that was the point. It was a constant bodily reminder that in the presence of power, one should never rush, especially not past the emperor's left side, which was traditionally considered his spirit half. Guards were instructed to never approach from that side. Advisors never bowed while standing to his left. And if a minister did accidentally approach from the left during morning court, he was either publicly scolded or given a promotion. Depends on the emperor's mood, of course. One curious story from the late Yuan dynasty tells of a minister who intentionally walked in from the left, paused, and placed his own shoe beside the emperor's as a silent protest against a harsh tax edict. The emperor stared at the shoes for a long time, and then he removed his own left shoe and walked barefoot out of the hall. The tax was repealed. So maybe there's a power in those gestures, in shoes as protest, in imbalance as meaning. And yet for all their symbolism, these shoes were still physical things. They frayed, they tore. They were repaired often by the same few seamstresses and cobblers who were allowed to handle imperial items. A handful of notes survive from one such artisan. In her final letter she wrote, "The left shoes wear through first, always. Not because they walk more, but because they feel more." That line has been debated for years. Was it metaphor? Was she talking about silk tension? Was she just tired of patching soles? Maybe all of the above. But when you look at the tiny left shoe under its glass dome, the embroidery faded just a little on one edge. It's hard not to believe her, and it makes you think about your own childhood shoes. The ones that pinched or squeaked or rubbed your ankle raw. The ones you couldn't wait to outgrow. The ones you maybe still keep in a box somewhere, just because. What burdens did they carry? What whispers would they still echo if you listened close? Here in the circular library, everything is still. The left shoe waits. And you, standing barefoot in imagination, can almost feel its shape around your foot. Uncomfortable, intentional, sacred. You take one quiet breath and step forward again. You descend now not into shadow, but into silence. Down a curling staircase, stone-worn smooth in the center, from centuries of pacing, you go barefoot for a moment, just to feel the cool truth of it under your skin. These stairs weren't made for speed. They were made for reflection. At the base, a low hallway, narrow and dim, where the walls feel close enough to breathe against. This is not a hallway meant for emperors. This is where the hidden things live. Tonight you've arrived at the court of shoes not meant to be worn. Sounds ominous, right? But don't worry, it's not a horror story. Just a quiet corner of imperial tradition where practicality took a long vacation and left behind a collection of footwear that was never supposed to touch the ground. Let's begin with the ceremonial cloud shoes. These were used in highly specific Taoist rituals, typically held during rare lunar alignments, or when a major celestial event occurred. Think comets, eclipses, or particularly feisty dragon star cycles. The emperor, robed in layered silks dyed with real mercury and indigo, would be presented with cloud shoes, embroidered slippers made from paper-thin silver thread, mounted on platforms of compressed sandalwood and hollow gold. Yes, hollow. So they were light enough to be lifted easily, but if you actually walked in them, you'd shatter your ankles and your dignity in under 5 seconds. So what did the emperor do? He stood in them, perfectly still, because the ceremony wasn't about movement, it was about alignment, cosmic alignment. The idea was that during this exact window of the heavens shifting, the emperor stood as the central axis of the earthly realm. The shoes were there to remind him, and everyone watching, that sometimes staying still is the act of ruling. And in those moments, the emperor did not need to walk. He simply had to be. Still, that didn't stop at least one poor soul from attempting a few forbidden steps. A young emperor from the Southern Song era reportedly took 3 daring strides in his cloud shoes during a private rehearsal, only to crash into an incense altar and spend the next 2 weeks ruling from bed with a dislocated hip. Historians still argue whether that fall was staged to make a point about celestial disrespect, or just a very predictable accident. Either way, no one tried walking in cloud shoes again. But those weren't the only unworn relics hidden in this part of the palace. Next, you come across a display shelf holding what can only be described as echo slippers. These were left shoes made from finely layered bamboo strips designed not for walking, but for listening. Yes, listening. Placed beside the emperor's bed during certain dream sight rituals, the echo slippers were believed to absorb dream sounds through the heel. The court shamans. Yes, the palace had a few, would later read the shoe's fibers, interpreting creaks, temperature changes, and even lingering scent to decipher what messages had been delivered to the emperor in his sleep. You can't make this stuff up, except someone clearly did hundreds of years ago and then everyone else just nodded and kept going. One record tells of a left echo slipper that grew unexpectedly warm one night during a blood moon. The shaman interpreted it as a warning against the rise of cold hearts, which somehow turned into a sweeping reform of marriage laws because of a warm shoe. Your tax dollars at work. And here's where things get extra weird. There was a collection of these left slippers, each one used only once, then sealed and stored in lacquered boxes, labeled with dream titles like The Sleeping River Whispers Beneath Peach Blossoms, or simply The Boy with No Name. We still don't know what that last one meant, but that box has never been opened. Even modern scholars hesitate, probably wisely. Then there's the one-step shoes, ultra-delicate slippers crafted from thin ice resin, and white silk designed to literally melt after a single step. Yes, really, the idea was rooted in a metaphysical belief that certain choices a ruler made should be irreversible. Once you took that step figuratively and physically, the ground changed behind you. These were used during judgment days when an emperor would personally select the fate of a province, a criminal, or a clan. The emperor would put on the one-step shoes walk across a specially prepared platform dusted with warm ash. And by the time he reached the other end, gone, shoe melted, decision made, no going back. And the symbolism, oh, it landed hard. Ministers would watch breathlessly, waiting to see whether the soul left behind any recognizable impression in the ash. If it did, some believed it was a sign the emperor hesitated, and the judgment would carry hidden consequences. Talk about pressure. One famous case from the Qing era tells of a shoe that refused to melt. The emperor stood on the ash platform for nearly 30 minutes. The resin stayed intact. Eventually frustrated, he kicked the shoe off and declared, "Let heaven decide." A storm struck the capital the next day. 2 ministers resigned. Coincidence, historians still argue whether. Yeah, you knew that was coming. These rooms, these shoes, these stories, they all blur the line between what was real and what was believed. But to the emperor's belief was reality. And shoes became a quiet language for that belief. Even the act of removing a shoe carried weight. In some secret ceremonies, the emperor would silently take off his left shoe, place it atop a polished mirror, and stare at his reflection, not to judge his face, but to observe his stance. The left shoe was his shadow self, and this ritual was a way to ask, am I still leading with the right part of me? You can't help but admire that level of introspection, or gently chuckle at the sheer overthinking of it. But then again, don't we all have shoes we keep, but never wear shoes tied to memories? Moods, moments we'd rather not repeat. Maybe that pair you danced in on the wrong night, or the ones you wore when you left someone behind. We all have one-step shoes, even if they didn't melt. As you move through the court of unworn souls, the shoes seem to fade into the air. They were never made to last, but their meanings linger. Like the outline of a step, like a footfall on snow that melts before you turn around. You step away softly, and this time, you don't even check if you're wearing your left shoe. Some stories only walk with you if you let them. And now, with your breath slow and steady, you emerge into a place unlike any other you've seen in the palace. A garden, not a grand one. Not a showcase of peonies and ceremonial ponds. No. This is hidden secret sunken into the folds of the outer walls. You feel it before you see it. Moist air, thick with the scent of moss and wet stone, a trickle of water somewhere in the dark. Lanterns flicker low along the path, barely bright enough to catch your feet. This quietly and unofficially was known as the Garden of the Lost Soul. Yeah, someone had fun naming that. The story goes that any left shoe the emperor lost, whether by accident, on purpose, or through spiritual misplacement, was brought here. It started as a storage nook, a forgotten alcove where sandals left behind during river rituals or ceremony rehearsals were just tossed. But over time, it turned sacred. Because emperors don't just lose shoes, they shed them, on purpose, ritualistically, almost rebelliously, like the boy who threw his pinching left shoe across the courtyard. Remember him. Multiply that by 24 dynasties, and you've got a pile of left shoes that symbolized something deeper. Rejection, reflection, resistance. See, every emperor, at least the ones worth remembering, eventually had a breaking point. A moment where the pressure of their title, the weight of celestial perfection, became just too much. And in those moments, many of them did the same thing. They took off their left shoe and left it behind. Not in public, of course. That would be a scandal. But here in this mossy garden tucked behind a false wall or veiled under a curtain of willows, they'd come barefoot, step softly across stone paths, slick with dew, and place the shoe beside the others. No labels, no plaques, just presence. And the shoes, they stayed. A few crumbled into mulch over time. Others grew green fuzz along their seams. But some, especially the imperial silks and lacquered soles, still sit there perfectly upright, as if waiting for their matching foot to return someday. There's a stone bench here, long and curved like a dragon's back, worn from centuries of exhausted emperors sitting down and just exhaling. Some scribes call this space the emperor's confessional, not because they spoke to anyone here, but because this was the only place they could feel themselves again, without the robes, without the fanfare, just a man and his sore feet. One record tells of an emperor who came here after ordering a brutal execution. He sat for 3 hours in the rain, one shoe off toes buried in the mud. When his ministers found him, he was half asleep, muttering, "The earth doesn't know justice, only steps." Was that wisdom? Regret early onset trench foot? You decide. There's a quirky bit of law that says if you leave your left shoe in the Garden of the Lost Soul during the Mid-Autumn Festival, your burdens will be halved by morning. Naturally, this turned into a bizarre annual ritual among the lower court. Guards, servants, even eunuchs. They'd sneak in, leave behind a slipper or sandal, left only always left, and sneak out barefoot on one side. The palace tailors were constantly confused about the surge in one-shoed requests each fall. Historians still argue whether this was tolerated as a harmless venting tradition or actively encouraged by clever emperors who saw the emotional value in letting everyone shed a little weight, even if only symbolically. And yes, there are a few forbidden shoes here too. Ones never officially logged, which seem to have been dropped during moments of deep personal crisis. There's a tattered black satin left shoe, rumoured to belong to the emperor, who renounced his throne to become a monk. No one ever confirmed it, but someone planted a single chrysanthemum beside it. Every year it still blooms. Then there's a jade green slipper with a split seam, evidence perhaps of a hasty exit. Some say it belonged to an empress who tried to flee the palace in disguise. Others say it was placed by an emperor in memory of her. Either way, its presence feels heavier than the others. And finally, near the corner wall, where ivy creeps like slow lightning, there's a wooden clog. Just one. Plain. No carving, no silk, no seal. The kind of shoe a peasant might wear. Why is it here? Theories abound. One scholar claims it was placed there by the emperor who first declared himself son of heaven as a nod to his humble beginnings. Another argues it was left by a palace gardener by mistake. But here's the eerie part. That wooden clog is never dusty, it never seems to rot, and no one ever sees anyone tend to it, but it's always pristine. You lean a little closer now. Feel the tickle of a vine against your arm, the buzz of a nearby cicada, the soft squish of moss underfoot. This garden doesn't feel abandoned. It feels watched, but not in a scary way, more like remembered. The shoes are memories after all, forgotten on purpose, or maybe preserved by forgetting. And what's interesting is this. Despite the garden's long history, the left shoe tradition never extended to the right. No emperor ever left behind both. Only the left. Always the left. Why? Because in palace doctrine, the left side symbolized heart. To abandon the left shoe was to release the part of you that felt too much, or cared too deeply, or cracked under pressure. The right foot, that one marched forward. That one ruled, that one stayed shod. So here in this garden, you stand barefoot on one side, and fully royal on the other. Feels weird, doesn't it? Balanced, but not really. Which is maybe the entire point of this journey. You take one last look around. The moonlight drips across the soles like quiet music. A breeze moves through the bamboo. One tiny red slipper falls sideways, its silk finally giving up the ghost. And the garden sighs with it. You bow your head, not to the shoes, but to the people who once wore them. And then you move on, softer now, lighter, almost like you've left something behind too. The air is different now, crisp and dry, like the final exhale before sleep fully pulls you under. The corridors widen again and the walls shimmer slightly with old mica catching light like quiet secrets. Your steps echo but not loudly. More like a memory repeating itself, fading with every bounce. You're headed toward a chamber few people ever saw even back then, not because it was forbidden, but because it was forgotten. This was the workshop of the imperial shoemakers. You'd expect a place like this to be all noise and hammering right. Instead, it's quiet, still, lined with wooden counters worn smooth by generations of artisans who served not just one emperor, but entire dynasties. Shoemakers here passed their craft from father to son, master to apprentice, each generation leaving a little less written down and a little more stitched in muscle memory. Funny thing about these imperial cobblers, they weren't just craftsmen, they were scholars, astrologers, even part-time spies. Seriously, their job was to make shoes for a man who could never stumble, a man who had to be flawless even in the way his feet touched the earth. So these artisans had to anticipate everything: weight distribution, ceremony schedules, feng shui alignments, even the emperor's mood. One master cobbler reportedly refused to finish a shoe until he'd consulted the emperor's daily tea leaves. Another wouldn't stitch the heel until the emperor had made an offering to the god of the North Star. Paranoid? Maybe. But in a world where slipping at the wrong time could start a rebellion, paranoia was part of the job. On a central workbench lies a shoe in progress, just one, of course. A left shoe. Half-stitched, delicate, almost translucent in parts where spider silk had been used in place of cotton thread. Why spider silk? Because apparently in the later Ming dynasty, it was believed that shoes made with spider silk carried prophetic dreams. One emperor wore them to bed nightly, trying to foresee the outcome of a war campaign. After 3 nights of dreams about drowning in dumplings, he called off the offensive. Historians still argue whether that was a metaphor or just indigestion. Either way, the spider silk shoes became a trend, for a while, until someone realized spider silk doesn't handle foot sweat very well. The dreaminess wore off real quick, once toes started popping through the fabric mid-ceremony. Not exactly a power move. In one drawer, you find a pile of old blueprints, designs for shoes that were never made. Some are absurd. One has tiny brass chimes built into the heel meant to tinkle with every step like a wind bell. Another shows retractable soles so the emperor could hover an inch above the ground during divination rituals. Kind of a floating sneaker. A few pages show sandal concepts where the left shoe had grooves for hidden scrolls. Spy shoes. Real James Bond stuff. Most of these were never built, but the sketches remain half genius, half fever dream. And nestled among them is one final curiosity, a diagram labelled only as the nothing shoe. No details, no sole, no material listed, just a blank outline of a foot. What was it? A joke, a protest, a philosophical experiment. The notes in the margins are cryptic. To wear what cannot be worn, to step without trace, to feel the world, and yet leave it unchanged. Okay, Buddha, but maybe it meant something more. A shoe designed to be invisible, not just physically, but spiritually. The idea that true leadership leaves no footprint, that the best emperors don't need to be remembered by steps or shoes or statues, but by silence. That sounds poetic, sure, but it also sounds exhausting. And that's something you start to feel here among the tools and the thread and the ghostly hush of labor long-ended. The exhaustion behind perfection. The ache in the hands that stitch so precisely only for the shoes to be worn once, maybe not at all, and then sealed forever in some vault. This workshop was never about making things. It was about making moments. Every shoe crafted here had to support not just a body, but a symbol. A walking metaphor, which is a lot to ask of leather and thread. Still they managed. You pass by a wall where wooden lasts the foot molds still hang like masks. Each one carved from imperial foot measurements, though exaggerated slightly for grandeur. Heaven forbid the emperor had dainty toes. One has a chipped corner and an inscription, His Majesty stood here, for 3 hours, complaining, relatable. And in the far corner, under a cloth that smells faintly of camphor and age, sits a pair of shoes no one was ever meant to see. They're mismatched. Intentionally, the left is soft, almost a slipper lined with feathers and whisper-thin hemp. The right is rigid armoured and built with a layer of hammered bronze inside the heel. What's the story here? One theory suggests these were made for a dream ritual symbolising the emperor's dual nature, comfort versus command. Another claims they were test prototypes, used to see which side bore more weight in the emperor's natural gait. There's even a rogue idea that these were mourning shoes, worn after a favorite concubine died, allowing the emperor to literally walk unevenly as a symbol of his grief. Whatever the truth, they're beautiful in their strangeness. One step soft, one step sharp. You wonder what kind of path they would have walked. And then you realize that's been the story all along. Not just why the emperors never wore left shoes, or why they wore so many strange ones, but how every step was part of a larger choreography of power, of performance, of trying to balance humanity with myth. Right foot forward, left foot forgotten, but never truly lost. You take one last look around the workshop, breathing in the scent of old glue, sandalwood oil and thyme. Then you step out, a little more quietly than before. Your footsteps are still your own, but they carry echoes now. Echoes of shoes never worn, and of the people who made them. Outside the shoemaker's workshop, the corridors begin to narrow again. But not claustrophobically, more like a funnel guiding you to the story's quiet final note. The air has cooled, the wind outside hushed itself into occasional rustles through bamboo screens. Somewhere a drum sounds from a distant guard tower, marking the final hour before dawn. You're almost there. You find yourself descending once again, but this time not to any crypt or hidden garden. You're entering the chamber of the final robbing. This place, unknown to most modern retellings, is where emperors prepared not for coronation or ceremony, but for death. No, don't tense up, we're staying in the PG-13 lane, promise. This wasn't a grim chamber. It was reverent. Smooth quartz tiles underfoot. Lanterns always kept burning day and night in case the moment came suddenly. The smell of cinnamon and resin hangs in the air, oils used to anoint robes and calm nerves. And here's the curious thing. This room has rows of robes and crowns, but no left shoes. Not one. Right shoes line the lacquered shelves in pristine formation, each one embroidered with dragons, phoenixes, suns, lotuses, symbols of the emperor's journey through life. But where the left shoes should be, empty slots, some velvet cushions with indentations, others bare. This is no mistake. This chamber followed one very old belief whispered among palace priests and eunuchs alike, that no emperor should journey into the afterlife with both feet bound to the earth. To pass with a left shoe on would mean your soul might be too anchored, too caught up in earthly matters, grudges, guilt, power games, bureaucracy, all that delightful stuff. So before burial, emperors were ritually dressed, robes drawn crown, set incense lit, but only the right shoe placed on their feet. The left, it was either burned, buried separately, or if certain traditions held, never made at all. And here's a little superstition for you. It was said that if a left shoe accidentally appeared during this process, the emperor's spirit would wander. Not as a vengeful ghost, but as a confused bureaucrat. Lost in paperwork. Forever. Honestly sounds worse. Historians still argue whether this tradition was widespread, or just confined to a few dynasties, particularly the Song and Ming. Some tombs show only one shoe in burial records. Others show two, but scholars believe the left may have been symbolic or included posthumously by well-meaning descendants. A spiritual typo, if you will. But within this chamber, the symbolism is deliberate. Right shoe on, Traum, stepping forward into heaven. Left shoe absent, letting go of the world. It's a beautiful thought, a little tragic, but peaceful. One late imperial journal tells of an emperor who during his final hours requested to hold his left shoe in his hands as he drifted off. He said it reminded him of everything he had struggled with, and also somehow everything he had survived. When he passed, the shoe was still clutched in his hand, not on his foot. The priests took that as a good sign. And in this chamber you find one more curiosity, an old logbook sealed with wax and gold leaf. Inside lists, names, dates, robe types, and next to each a notation in red ink. R only, left burned, left gifted to river, gifted to the river. That's another version. In some ceremonies, the left shoe was cast into the nearest river at dawn. Not thrown, but released, placed gently on the current, and allowed to drift. Imagine it. The silent boatmen. The golden slipper floating into the fog. A final symbol of release. Kind of poetic, don't you think? And here, in the quietest part of the Forbidden City, the logic becomes clear. It was never just about superstition. It was about balance. Because the Emperor was never just a man. He was heaven's representative. Too much humanity, and he couldn't rule. Too much divinity, and he couldn't connect. The left shoe, the heart, the emotion, the softness, was the one thing that could tip the scales either way. So it had to be removed. A final humility, a final offering, and maybe in some way a final apology to the parts of himself that had been silenced all along. You linger here for a long time. The quiet wraps around you. There's no grand monument, no triumphant exit, just this subtle, almost invisible practice that stretched across centuries passed through whispers upheld in ritual and now almost entirely forgotten. Except now you know, and that makes you part of it. You trace your fingers along one of the empty velvet pads where a left shoe never sat. The fabric is soft, worn, not sad exactly, more at peace. You take one last breath of the cinnamon air and step away. So now, as the last threads of story gently unravel, you begin to feel the weight of the silence around you. Not empty silence, but a full, comforting kind. Like the hush before snowfall. Like velvet drawn over the windows. You've walked through a palace not of bricks and walls, but of symbols, steps, souls, stories hidden in sandals, slippers, and invisible threads that stretch from cradle to coffin. And somehow, through all that ancient pomp and ceremonial precision, you've discovered something human. That sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is let go. Let go of the left shoe. Let go of needing to explain everything. Let go of trying to be flawless. You lie back now, your limbs, loose, your breath steady. The story hums in the background, like a lullaby only your body understands. Maybe you picture that floating shoe drifting downriver under moonlight. Or the hidden garden where moss grows over old mistakes. Or the mismatched pair sitting in the dark waiting for a step that never came. All of them still, all of them soft. And you're almost there now. Sleep is close, kind, slow as incense smoke. You don't need both shoes for this journey. Just stillness and silence. And the dream of a story that walked its way gently into your heart. So let go now. Feel yourself sink. Right foot forward, left shoe forgotten, and good night. End of script. Sweet dreams.